regulatory and see if we can polish this way. So we have Molly Turner. Hi, Molly.
Hi.
And then we have Lane. Hi, Lane. You guys want to quickly introduce yourselves?
Do you have microphones?
The cool stuff you did?
I don't think we have microphones.
We don't have. This is a little bit like stand-up, comedy a little bit. So.
If I talk loudly, can you hear me?
Molly's Bonatsos. She's teaching a class at Berkeley, so she can totally, do it on this. All right.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah, what did you do before?
Sure. Hi everybody, I'm Molly Turner. I'm a lecturer at the business school at UC Berkeley across the bay, where I teach urban innovation. Before I was teaching, I started the policy team at Airbnb back in the early days and did a lot of different things there, which I'm happy to talk about. I'm a trained urban planner and I've worked on urban policy issues for several years before that.
And I'm Lane Kasselman. Can you hear me? I guess it's going to get a little bit quiet over there.
Come closer to the front.
Yeah.
These are nice people. Nobody's biting.
So I said my name is Lane Kasselman. I run a consulting firm, a crisis communications and public affairs firm called Greenbrier. But I'm actually the first head of communications at Uber. I was there for a couple of years and built out the communications team, public affairs team, and all of the regulatory work that we did. She can't hear anything we're saying.
Hey, we have a session going on in here. Please shut up.
Thank you.
We'll do a separate presentation for you afterwards, so we'll just like more.
You can come sit. There are a bunch of seats up
Yeah,
here
there's a bunch of seats up front.
So basically, let's get started with that. What are some of the lessons learned from your experiences at Airbnb and Uber? That it's good for a first-time founder, somebody who's dealing today with civic partnerships. Like, what are some of the lessons learned that you want to share with us?
So lessons learned from working at Airbnb and Uber.
Yeah.
The first thing I'll tell you is going to be disappointing. I don't know that you should learn from Airbnb or Uber because I don't know that their experiences are replicable today. We can talk a little bit about this, but the landscape has changed since Airbnb and Uber first started working with, against, for cities. But let's see if I can give you some useful lessons. One, the city always bats last. As in, you might win the battle, but I doubt you're going to win the war. So when you're working with city governments, you can be aggressive and antagonistic, but they're always going to find a way to get you. It might not be with regulations, it might be with something else. And if city government doesn't do it, it'll get kicked up to the state level. The second lesson that I'd like to share is that, especially if you're an early stage tech company, one of the reasons to avoid or put off negotiating with cities is you keep telling yourself it's too early. It's too early for our business. We can't make these concessions yet. If we only had more users, we'd have more negotiating leverage. In retrospect, I wish that we had taken more deals earlier in at Airbnb. We actually would have gotten better deals had we done that. And today, Airbnb is forced into deals that are worse and is getting less credit for.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I agree with Molly that there are a lot of early lessons from Uber that I wouldn't replicate for most startups. The sort of metaphor that's assigned to Uber's early days was, move quickly, break things, right? That's sort of similar to most other startups. But it was also ask for forgiveness, right? Don't ask for permission. And that really worked 4 years ago, 5 years ago. But most regulators are pretty wise to that these days. And I don't know that that strategy is appropriate anymore. But what I will tell you is that, Uber realized that eventually all regulators would come around, right? So eventually the type of people that get elected to office represent what most consumers are doing. And so regulations will evolve and change. It just never really happens on a startup timeline. It takes a lot longer for regulations to catch up with what we're doing in the Valley.
So I was having conversations with some people who were early at Lyft, and they were saying we were just as illegal as Uber was. but they were perceived as, or branded as bad people, or perceived as the nice people. It could be, like the advice you may have, like if it's like two companies head to head, how can you perceive as a nice people?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there will be a lot of books written about why one is so perceived as sort of a positive company and one's perceived as a negative company. It could be that one's pink and the other's black. I'm not sure. I think that besides like their color patterns, the Pantone, I think the reality is one had a lot more money, and so they were able to be a lot more aggressive in their approach. The other didn't, right? So they weren't able to be as aggressive, so they folded in behind their competitors.
So basically raise less, that's the point of advice.
I have another observation. So Airbnb was also compared a lot of the times to Uber in government relations strategy, because we were often having conversations with the same cities at the same time, though with different departments often, because we were regulated by different departments. But while I was in Portland, Uber and Lyft were trying to enter Portland, and we were all actually talking to the same commissioner. And he said this publicly, and he also said it privately to me. He said, gee, if there was a way to make Uber illegal while still allowing Lyft to operate, I would. Because I just hate working with Uber. And he didn't tell me why that was, but this is a really important point. So much of your success in government relations is going to come down to personality, right? Government relations is all about building relationships. If you come in with a huge ego from Silicon Valley and you say, you city don't know what the future looks like, you are wrong, we are right, no one's going to like you, right? But if you come in and say, I totally understand your concerns, I want to work with you, I'm willing to work and compromise, they might like you a little more, not a guarantee, but I think the dichotomy between the two companies might have exaggerated some of the differences in their government relations styles. It's probably unfair, but boy, did a lot of the regulators I talked to notice the differences just in the tone that companies took and individuals within those companies took when they were approached.
Awesome. So what's different today? Like for people who are just a couple of years in, what is different?
Yeah. Well, regulators have gotten wise to our tricks, right? They know what we're up to. The whole idea that you could ask for forgiveness, you could just launch in a city. There's countless examples in San Francisco of startups that just tried. I think there was one that tried to auction off public parking spaces, right? Like didn't work, right? Didn't fly with the city. So that era is over. You need to now ask for permission, or you need to cooperate. Things have evolved quite dramatically, and local regulators, for the most part, those are the ones that will be interfacing with most startups. They want to work with you, but within reason, right? But they're used to you coming to the table. They're used to somebody with a new crazy idea coming to the table, wanting to sort of change the status quo, or need a change to some local regulations, or need some kind of support from their office. But they're willing to sit down and work with you, but they need patience, right? They need time. I don't know if that is it for us, but
I couldn't agree more with Lane. The jig is up. You cannot come in and just say, we're launching, deal with it. That doesn't work anymore. They will find a way to shut you down. It doesn't matter how small you are. Cities do not appreciate that anymore.
It's actually been happening in some of the bike sharing.
Yeah, so Blue Gogo, one of the Chinese bike sharing companies, tried to do it, got shut down, and they are not welcome in town anymore. And it's made life quite difficult for many of the other companies. A couple other things that are different.
Can you share that story?
Yeah, so one of the Chinese bike share companies wanted to put their shared dockless bikes in San Francisco. There weren't any clear regulations around whether that was something the city would allow or not. It was kind of a gray area, which is something Airbnb and Uber both took advantage of, this kind of regulatory gray area. But the city very quickly after that happened passed a new law that made it illegal. And not only that, then created a permitting system so they could vet which operators they wanted, which made it very difficult for a company like Blue Gogo to even apply for and get a permit. So even if it wasn't illegal at the time, the city moved real fast to take action on it, which is different. And we're seeing this in cities around the world. They don't want to lose control of these new technologies again, so they're moving a lot more quickly, which is a good thing. It means that if you have a good idea that helps the city with a goal that they actually have, they are going to be, in most cases, more willing to lean in and work with you, even if you're small and unproven. Again, because they've seen these ideas scale so quickly. Key being, you have to have an idea that helps solve a challenge that they care about. Another thing I've noticed, and this is not only post-Airbnb and Uber, but post-election, and for those of you who've been following the Facebook fallout over the past several months, government officials are a lot less starry-eyed about technology and innovation. Before, every city wanted to compete with San Francisco to be the innovation capital. Anything that they could do with a tech company would be positive. That has changed, right? Today, just because you're a technology company or because you use the word innovation, a city won't care about you as much. Again, you have to be solving a real challenge that they have. And they get pitched all the time on these ideas, so you have to have a really thoughtful pitch that is empathetic to what they are going through and that stands out from the rest.
One thing I'll add, San Francisco is a terrible place to launch a startup idea, right? New York, also Seattle. There's a couple of markets where they've just been inundated with startups coming in with, all these different interesting ideas that they think are going to be great and change the world. This city in particular doesn't care anymore. They don't want you here, they don't want your idea, and they're going to make it very difficult to operate. So, I counsel a lot of our clients to look at other cities that maybe don't have the same type of inundation with startups going before City Hall asking for permission to operate. They're just exhausted here with it. And you see it every day in the local paper with local elected officials saying, I don't want this, I don't want that, I'm going to pass a law against this. It's happening every day.
Totally.
This seems quite scary. Where do you see do you see that in future cities will actively working against tech or?
Oh yes, San Francisco is actively working against a lot of tech startups right now. Even if you have a good idea, the political brand of technology is not very good in San Francisco. So just identifying yourself as a tech company could harm you here.
What about San Jose?
San Jose, totally different. Are you kidding? They would love some tech companies to pitch them.
Right. Yeah.
My question is regarding sales tax. At what point, I've had advice from my accountants, in your early stage you don't really need to worry, but at what point should you start being conscientious of charging sales tax to your different vendors?
Right, so in San Francisco, the treasure tax collector.
Marketplace, it's multi-city.
Yeah.
So our companies in California, but we have vendors in New York selling to people in Florida. So it becomes this whole complicated web of sales tax.
So one of the questions we're going to get to in a few minutes from Niko are recommendations and when to hire a lobbyist. Yeah, that's when to hire one.
However, I would say, again, another recommendation for those of you starting companies, take smart risks. Airbnb was fully compliant with all regulations that applied to Airbnb, the internet platform. Where we were pushing regulators was on the ability of our hosts to rent out their homes short term, right? Airbnb was paying all of the taxes that legally it clearly needed to pay. We negotiated with regulators on how to collect the hotel tax that our hosts needed to collect and remit to the cities. Same thing goes for any kind of regulation that has to do with safety. Don't be dumb. Make sure that the activity that's happening on your platform is safe. You need to take smart risks on regulations that are not clear. Regulations that clearly apply to you or your hosts. You should really be serious about complying with them, even in the early days.
So you guys have been advising a number of younger startups, like advisors, investors. The last couple of years, what are some of the best examples, like case studies, to demonstrate success?
So you brought it up earlier. I think bike sharing is probably one of the most interesting case studies right now because there are so many companies that are doing it well and doing it poorly. So Go aside, which did very poorly, you've got sort of a bifurcation in sort of strategy. You've got the line bikes of the world, which are being very aggressive in their approach and launching through cities all throughout the US. Then you've got the well-funded startups on the OFO and mobike side, right? And they're being very thoughtful and slow about their launch in various markets. So on one hand, you've got one that is, basically getting the initial signs of permission to operate. Maybe they have a phone call with the local regulator saying, you know what, I think we're probably going to move in the direction of a permit for you to operate. And they're just taking that as a cue to go ahead and launch. And they're going to deal with any kind of cease and desist, or you guys hear me on this? They're going to deal with any kind of cease and desist they get from the city, or any kind of punitive reaction they get from the local government. That's the line bike side. But then you've got the OFO and the mobike side, where they are making sure they've got a signed letter, the equivalent of a signed letter from the city, saying that they've got explicit permission to operate. Both strategies are working pretty well, and I think all three of those companies have pretty bright futures around the US. But it's very evident that both strategies still work. But you have to be very thoughtful about which one you're going to proceed with, and then I think probably go all in on it.
So I'll continue with the bike share example because I think that's probably the most timely example, and I also
Do we have
happen
any bikes there in
to.
Congress here?
No, okay, good.
No.
It's a crowded space, so I wouldn't recommend getting into it. I happen to advise Spin, one of the bike share companies, and one of the things that I'm proud that they did was, when you're deciding you want to launch somewhere in the US, no city in the US had this dockless bike sharing business yet. Like I said, reasons that I won't get into. But
I have a lot of good reasons.
And they were willing to take the time to do that. And that took probably longer than maybe some of their investors would want, but because they chose the city smartly, they were successful, and it took almost just long enough to get it right, but not too long that they burned through too much money in the process. And Seattle's permit actually has become a model for cities around the world now, who are all calling Seattle to say, how did you create this permit? In fact, San Francisco copied the permit word for word, including the typos from Seattle. So I think that was a really smart approach, to take the time to identify the right city, to take the time to work with them to get it right, and then hopefully they can become a model for everywhere else.
Thank you both. So when should founders ask for help? And who should they call?
Before you get a cease and desist. I am so frustrated with people who call me after that happens. I don't really want to help you, and frankly, a lot of lobbyists don't want to help you after that happens because you've already shot yourself in the foot. When you start a business, you do a lot of research, right? To think about, is this a good business idea? For some reason, a lot of people don't do research into the legal and regulatory context for your business because perhaps they're misinformed by examples like Airbnb and Uber that you don't have to care about the regulatory context. That couldn't be farther from the truth. You need to do that research up front so that you can take smart risks about that legal and regulatory context. And a lot of the times you're going to find that the lawyers that you hire the tech lawyers that help you figure out the basic fundamentals of your business are not going to have the knowledge that you need to understand the regulatory environment your business is facing. So that's when you need to hire people like us, lobbyists, lawyers who specialize in this one area that you're working in to give you that early advice.
I'll also say that, now in 2018, things have changed a lot since 2013. So go back to 2013, there were very few folks from the policy world, from the political world. I worked for the mayor in San Francisco, and I worked for presidential candidates that were in tech. Very, very few. Very few folks that had sort of dual discipline experience. Now, fast forward, 5 years later, you've got hundreds of people from Airbnb, hundreds of people from Uber, and several other companies that all had political experience or policy experience that went in-house, gained that tech corporate experience, and now are out all over the place, right? They're starting new companies, they run consulting firms, they're lecturers at Berkeley, they're all over the place, and they're more than happy to sit down with you as you're starting your company and not charge you won't get a bill, right? But help look at what you're doing and give you an initial analysis on whether or not you're gonna need some help early on. And if you do need that help, make some recommendations about how to get it. But it's an important conversation to have early because, like Molly said, once you get into that mess, it's really hard for us to clean it up.
Fantastic. So do you guys have any questions for Lane and Molly? Go for it.
The question, what's the difference between domestic government? Sorry. What's the difference between domestic government relations versus international government? Is there a key difference?
Sure. While I was at Airbnb, I worked with city governments all over the world. They're all different. In some cases, you're going to be regulated by a different level of government, different places in the world, so make sure you understand that. And the way government works is different. For example, in San Francisco, I spent most of my time negotiating with a member of the Board of Supervisors, which is like our city council, an elected official. Whereas in the city of Amsterdam, I spent all my time negotiating with the Deputy Mayor of Housing, who is an appointed official, which means he's less concerned about the politics of the issue and more concerned with the policy and getting the policy right. So you need to figure out who the right people are in government. And I'll say, in some countries like the Netherlands, they don't have lobbyists. So you really have to do a lot of this work yourself.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add, any firm that tells you they can help you everywhere in the world is lying, right? Nobody has that expertise. Even if they have offices all over the place, they don't. But Molly's absolutely right. Negotiating with regulators here, you've got a city council to deal with. Negotiating with regulators in Brazil, you might be negotiating with a judge, which is completely foreign to what you do here. So you really need local expertise.
Any more questions?
How would a smaller resource strap company find expertise such as yourselves? If we're not going to these giant firms, or I don't have that in my Rolodex. So
you ask of your investors to beg one of them to take a courtesy meeting with you?
I'll go first.
But just in general, are there like resources where people go to find?
It's a great question. So again, over the past couple of years, we both have become good friends, and our contemporaries have, with various investment firms, right? And so your VC or your angel will probably know somebody like us, and they can refer them out, and those relationships are developing. Also, just the normal sources, right? LinkedIn, or doing some research in the press.
Last question, go for it.
Yeah, I have a question, but since it was raised differently, I have to set context. So before leaving home, my dad said, don't be evil and don't let money go negative. By that he meant don't borrow or use other people's money, just accumulate your own. So I'm 65, and that worked really well. And he also said, at the time Ralph Nader was starting, I was getting excited about the consumer rights movement, and he said, I raised you to be a producer, not a consumer, and when your clients need to be protected from you, you are not doing your job. Now, I came to Wall Street in the early 80s, worked for Morgan Stanley, back when they were all partnerships. So everybody knew that everybody was on the hook for everything they were worth if they did anything wrong, right? So this whole sort of like idea of the question about whether, and also my background is computer science, right? And programming. So when you're a programmer, you get all the bugs out before you deliver the software. So to me, I haven't heard anyone say, what you do is you go to the city of San Francisco and say, I don't want to do anything wrong. I don't want anybody to be raped by an Uber driver. I don't want any host to have something stolen. You guys are part of a tradition that goes back thousands of years, and we don't know what the fuck we're doing, and we're blinded by greed. So we need your help in making sure we don't do anything wrong. Now, that's how I've conducted my business for over 30 years, and I have never had a regulator say, I'm not on your side, because I'm on their side. Yes, my question is, first of all, how come I haven't heard that? I haven't heard it here, I haven't heard it anywhere. And why isn't that just the underlying ethos? And also, since now I'm thinking about launching some things that might need, can I call up San Francisco and say, I want to launch in Cincinnati? And they don't know as much as you do about finding out what's wrong with ideas. So can I pitch my idea to you, understanding that you have way too many people competing? I'll let the, but I want to test it in Cincinnati, but I don't trust them to catch what I'm doing wrong. So I want you to tell me what I'm doing wrong, because you have experience in catching people. When you say gig is up? What
Unfortunately,
gig is
we're
up?
running sort of time.
I know, so that's my question.
Okay, so.
Why is this not the first question?
A couple of seconds.
I think it's an important question, and this is what I teach in my class. You need to understand the impacts that you're having on the people in the cities and the cities that you're operating in, and the role with the conversation with government is to understand those impacts not only from your point of view, but from their point of view. But more often than not with a new idea, the folks in city government aren't going to know the answer to that question. So that's where it has to be a really productive two-way conversation.
Yeah, agreed. Niko?
Thank you. All right. Let's give it, to our panelists here. Thank you.